Horror is an extremely diverse genre that has existed in a plethora of different formats. It's popular because it makes you feel on edge, it toys with the macabre. Not only is it huge in general media, but it's also popular on the internet, to the point where the online world seems to have cultivated its own tropes, story archetypes, and unique spins. The internet's brand of horror is defined. Today will be a short video as to why I actually prefer the counterpart over the main genre. Now, obviously I'm not saying that I hate traditional horror or anything like that. It walked so that the internet could go do its thing. There are countless outstanding books like House of Leaves or I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, baller movies such as the It franchise or the Conjuring series. Heck, in my last video I covered horrifying Japanese urban legends, some of which predate the internet. Despite the clickbaity title and thumbnail, I more so think the internet reshaped horror in new, exciting, fun ways. I'm not saying that internet horror is infallible, I just think people on the World Wide Web have improved upon some of its best elements, created their own tropes, and elevated the genre. And here are my reasons why. Hollywood hates risk. That's why every other film in theaters is based on something else. They mostly go for what's already safe and reliable. Therefore, it leaves many horror movies feeling formulaic, especially if you've seen anything from Blumhouse recently. Oh, there's the fake out jump scare, there's the info dump character, there's the noise is coming from here to misdirect you because the killer will actually pop out from somewhere else moment. Obligatory hint of blood or gore. Oh, the character who was a dickhead got killed, who could have seen this coming? It's all pretty rinse and repeat. Meanwhile, those on the internet are not bound by financial incentive or any other force. Content creators make their own horror for the love of the game. Because of this, they don't feel the need to stick to formulas. Let's look at Creepypasta Story, the strangest security tape I've ever seen. In it, time starts moving and stopping randomly. You experience the uncanniness of that with the protagonist and see how time even distorts his own thought process, leading to a fairly shocking ending. It's only a 20-minute read, uses no gore, no jump scares, no one gets killed outside of mentions of past events that relate to the villain, yet I'd argue it's more creative than like 90% of horror movies. It captures the feeling of fear through unconventional means. Another example is analog horror. Videos from this subgenre don't always have jump scares, but rather constant tension. The monsters don't present themselves by popping out from the shadows every time or killing someone in gory ways. Instead, they show up through glitches in the system. Words change, eerie voices are heard, there are chilling audio effects, lots of innovative stuff. Plenty of analog horror makers had interesting narratives told through interesting formats. Some did get admittedly wacky, but at least they took risks. Things like this are not tried as much in Hollywood. And we can't forget the Everywhere at the End of Time album, or I guess collection of albums. It's a project containing 6 hours worth of old ballroom music. It represents the decline of a dementia patient. The album starts with coherent music but eventually devolves, with certain notes being off-key or out of tune. By the end, the music is a complete mess. It captures the angst of deteriorating mentally. It's extremely unique, focusing on something psychologically jarring that people don't often think about. The story is told through the tunes of music. Now, this isn't to say that these tropes have never been attempted in mainstream horror media, but it's rare that movies ever deviate from their designated formulas. You see more creativity among popular internet horror more than scary films. Ideally, horror should be realistic. This is obviously because it's meant to scare you, and in order to do that, the viewer must be able to relate. It's easier to make an audience feel threatened when the threat feels plausible. In a movie, you won't always be able to make it seem very realistic. The fact that there are cameras getting impossible angles for good shots means that the immersion can only go so far. Same with third-person books, where you get to know what's going on wherever the focus happens to be. You have all information, whereas other characters don't. Now, they do have the occasional found footage movie, and first-person stories are a thing, however, those aren't practiced often. It's estimated that 60% of books are in third person, and as I stated previously, studios don't like being experimental. Found footage films can still be considered risky. On the internet, realism is better implemented. Many pieces of horror media online will use intentionally grainy footage or staticky, poor audio quality to make something feel more legitimate. Let's look at Mandela Catalog, which does this. In it, you watch broadcasts and news tapes which present themselves as authentic. When documenting a scary event, this is all you would realistically have. footage, news reports, recordings. You wouldn't see close-up shots showing all emotions, or music. Mandela Catalog has almost no jump scares, the alternates mostly show up through glitches or surveillance videos. Reddit No Sleep is a good example of how internet horror practices realism. It's a subreddit dedicated to scary stories, however, they must all be realistic fiction or only have small deviations from that. Therefore, the tales you read come off as documented experiences. That makes it more relatable. Pen Pal is one of the most famous, if not the most popular in that community. It now has a professional book adaptation, and it's incredibly realistic. You read through the person's written experiences, going through and sorting out the oddities, and all of it is plausible and connected. Some of the stories don't seem to relate until you think deeper or turn the page to the next one. The mystery seems complex and almost scattered until the end. The character himself still shows some confusion over it all, and you feel like you're in his shoes. Again, plenty of horror movies have done things like this, it's just far less often. My favorite story on No Sleep, honestly my favorite book or written piece in general, is Baraska. It does the best job at setting up its world and characters that I've ever seen in a realistic way. It's a story about a kid who moves to a new town, hears local urban legends, and when his sister disappears, he spends years tying her loss to the legends. You feel misdirected, almost wanting to believe it's something paranormal throughout the events. I won't spoil the ending, but everything is perfectly plausible. It's a phenomenal, very shocking story. It's partially what compelled me to make this video in the first place. I've never seen any mystery movie or book be as good as this. One of the biggest sins that a lot of horror properties engage in is over-explaining to the audience. They sometimes have a character whose purpose is entirely to infodump, or someone will find missing posters and records of the deity having existed before the story starts. I honestly think it's scarier when you don't know these things. That's what worked really well for the first Halloween film in 1978. You see Michael kill his sister at a young age and you never understand why, but he breaks out 20 years later to keep murdering more people. We have no clue what drives him. His psychologist Loomis describes him as being nothing but a killing machine. There's a black hole left for the audience to place their interpretations. Is it malice, rage, curiosity? Does he get some sick enjoyment? We never know, which is the most thrilling part. Every attempt Hollywood has taken to explain it just makes the entire franchise fall apart. They first tried making it some kind of dumb legacy cult thing, pretty awful, and then the Rob Zombie remake gave it a 30-minute info dump showcasing that Michael was in an abusive household, he got bullied, his mom was a sex worker, and he liked torturing small animals, all cliche and poor reasoning. You may be wondering why I'm bringing up Halloween, because that is a mainstream horror series and not internet-based. However, not a lot of horror movies leave things up to interpretation anymore, not as much as internet horror does. How about the Backroom series? Why are we here? What even is this place? We get some ideas. Why does it exist though? We don't really know any of that. We have no idea what the monsters and entities really are, and that's what makes them more terrifying. Branching off of that, the trend of scary liminal spaces in general is a good example. Why are these places so scary? Are they familiar? Is it a fear of nostalgia? A fear of forgetting? With the internet, it's easier to go about ARGs and form engaging mysteries. Mainstream horror did do this in the late 90s with the Blair Witch Project. It was a found footage movie made to seem as realistic as possible. Hints and details were even left on web pages leading up to the film's release. Other than that, this sort of thing isn't practiced much outside the web. Five Nights at Freddy's was a huge franchise that famously did things like this. Clues to the story ranged from the source codes of the creator's website to being written in stories and books. It feels immersive, like you're putting together a murder mystery and you get to be the investigator. Another fantastic example is Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, which looks like a kids show that gets progressively more disturbing. You sort of wonder why you're watching it. The series has many deeper meanings underneath though as you get through, which aren't really readily apparent at first. Some are up to interpretation. It makes you feel uneasy but also curious, and the ending seems confusing and takes some thinking about and rewatching to fully grasp. Something special about internet horror is that it brings so many people together to create mythos. They add lore to characters, write stories, add fan sequels, and contribute so much to concepts that usually don't start off as being that big. Slender Man was originally just a creepy Photoshop. The original pictures of him were basically just cursed images posted to a forum. He never had tentacles, he wasn't a monster or anything, he was simply a faceless man in a suit. But the internet has come together to do so much with this tiny, paper-thin concept. They've written stories, books, made their own fan movies, many of which were better than the real real one. Even ARGs. There were video games where you'd go around collecting pages in the woods to try and avoid him. He was the operator in some spins, presiding above other characters that fans made. I mentioned Five Nights at Freddy's earlier, and that brought so many together, making their own headcanons, pieces of fiction, theorizing. Everyone solved it with each other like a Rubik's Cube. We are FNAF. Freddy, what does FNAF stand for? Friends never abandon friends. But seriously, it creates that communal aspect which is special because like-minded people work together to make something out of what could essentially be nothing. Jeff the Killer is a basic story. It's poorly written, edgy teen fiction, but horror fans congregating around it caused so much evolution. Caleb Bannon Kellum wrote his own version, spinning the short story into a very long mystery drama series. A YouTuber by the name of Postra also rewrote the story into something much greater. Other OCs have been created around it like Jane, Nina, Homicidal Lou. Even if some of these aren't that good, it's at least fun to have that communal aspect. Traditional horror media doesn't have this collaborative element as much. Or think of SCP, which I never got too much into, but it's a very big collection of scary entities made by all of these different people, and a lot of the creatures made have their own unique powers and abilities. Now, this is the section where I will criticize internet horror because, as I mentioned, it's not perfect. There are still some common traits that grind my gears a little bit. Even though creators are not generally bound to tropes the same way Hollywood depends on them absolutely, some tropes get copied and repeated. Nostalgia is a pretty overused one. It's been around since long before Five Nights at Freddy's, but ever since that series blew up, nostalgia-based horror has been done to death. The idea of, oh, it's cute on the outside, but actually scary within, is fun, though has gotten pretty played out in recent years. Speaking of that, the internet trying to make serial killers into cute little beans is very annoying as well. A little off topic, it's just one of those rules of the internet, you know, like Rule 1, everyone you meet online is a man. Rule 34, we don't need to get into that one. One of them is that everything cute will be turned crude or scary, and everything scary will be turned cute. However, I say nay. Jeff the Killer, Ben Drowned, and Slender Man are not anime catboys baking a cake together in a mansion or whatever. They're killers, damn it. At least mainstream horror fans understand this. I'm sure some of them do that, infantizing their favorite murderer, but I don't see as many edits of, say, Michael Myers being an anime catboy, or, I don't know, the shark from Jaws being seen as just a cute Will Bean. The mainstream horror fans don't do that. As creative as plenty of analog horror series got, some of them stuck with common tropes like photorealistic eyes as the scare. Chainmail was another big one. The whole send my story to someone else or else the poop monster is gonna come haunt your butt, like Carmen Winstead or Smile Dog. There also isn't any quality control on the internet, so some internet horror gets questionable. Sonic EXE is a really stupid one. Clockwork was also a pretty clunky piece that's now seen as very controversial, for good reason. In fact, you know, I'm a huge creepypasta fan. I have been since the genre even came out, before I was even double digits, and I still consider myself a huge fan of it today, even though it's kind of died off. Yes, I'm still a huge creepypasta fan in the big 2026. That said, I will say about half of that fandom was just people trying to get their edgy teen OCs out there. For every creative campfire story posted, there was at least one emo self-insert fanfic of a fanfic of a fanfic. So while its internet counterpart isn't perfect, I personally enjoy everything we've made horror into here online. And there's a reason it's succeeding to the point where it's becoming just as popular as the genre outside the web. Whenever something internet horror related gets passed off to Hollywood, that doesn't really seem to go well though. The Slender Man movie, the I Dared My Best Friend to Ruin My Life professional ARG, and the Five Nights at Freddy's movie are just a few examples, all completely atrocious. A lot of filmmakers who pursue turning these properties into mainstream cinema often miss what made those properties special in the first place. But one day they might get it. I remember in the 2000s and early 2010s when video game movies were seen as stereotypically some of the worst. Everyone hated them. Now though, Hollywood tends to collaborate with developers a bit more and better adapt the things we like from the games. Video game movies today feel like average adaptations and not cardinal sins against nature the way they used to. Think of the 90s Mario movie And then think of the 2023 one. Hopefully, if Hollywood does eventually get its greedy mitts on creepypasta or other internet horror franchises, that they remember what makes these franchises so lovable in the first place.